Hi, Pooja. Thank you so much for joining us for this week's of Rethink Live about opportunities to humanize selling. Great to have you.
You're welcome. It's awesome being here. Thanks for having me.
So you're the Director of Sales Enablement at Oracle. You're also the regional host at Trust Enablement. And of course, the perfect person to talk a little bit about humanizing sales or humanized selling. And one of the main reasons why I invited you in particular and wanted to talk about this topic is because I think sales, as a lot of other industries, has of course shifted a lot in the last years. We have demanding customers, we have new digital solutions and touch points that is causing a complex world of sales. Throw a little pandemic into that as well, and we kind of have this whole new environment that we have to navigate. So I think a lot of companies have struggled with that. Some has probably managed to get out of that situation with more success. Some are still probably figuring out what success looks like for them. But that's really why I wanted to have a bit of a chat with you to hear some of your thoughts around it. And you have more than 20 years of experience in sales across, I think, 3 different countries. You worked in IBM, now you're in Oracle. But you told me earlier that it's not just 20 years, because you actually started your career at 15 doing door-to-door sales. So it seems like sales is really like your passion. It's in your blood. So maybe tell me a little bit more about your journey. What do you do now, and why sales and sales enablement?
Okay, well, that's a loaded question. So yes, my journey started when I was about 15 or 16 years old in London. I happened to be there for a very long holiday, and someone suggested that it might be useful. Do you remember the Avon ladies? You may not even know what the Avon ladies were.
And I think I'm from the wrong country, and I might even be from the wrong year. But tell me more. What is this Avon lady?
Avon ladies used to take makeup door to door and sell
yes,
it
I know about these.
housewives
Yeah, of course.
who were bored in the afternoon and would like to spend some money. So at 15, I happened to be in London for a holiday with my family, and it was about 6 weeks long, this holiday, and I thought, well, so for a few weeks I was offered the opportunity to go with a friend's mother and go door-to-door selling and make a little bit of pocket money so that I can buy all the stuff that I wanted to in London while I was there, of course. So that was my trick, was to be able to do 2 or 3 weeks of Avon lady selling, and I think I did pretty well for 15.
I'm not surprised by that, but I have to say your career has progressed a little bit since then.
A little bit since then, yes.
A little bit since then.
So I started off in sales. I actually have a background in hospitality management, so that's a sidetrack. That's kind of what I studied and did, which is in Australia. But I moved into sales, in technology sales, when I moved into IBM many years ago. And and in that space, I grew in the sales field, but I also fell into this concept called sales enablement, which wasn't called sales enablement at that time. It was called various other areas. But the idea was to be able to train, enable, and help sellers sell better. So I fell into that, I think about 15 years ago. And since I love it, I absolutely love it. It kind of brings out a lot of things that I truly value, which is, helping sellers position themselves with value in front of customers and understand the customer as well. So I've done that across a spectrum of sellers, across Australia, India, and now KL, which is where I live. But I have done Asia Pacific as well as global roles. So I have a little bit of experience that kind of budded out of that Avon lady in the UK.
We all start somewhere, right?
We all start somewhere.
Maybe you also host a podcast, right? That I actually been a part of. So you're on the board of the foundation called Trust Enablement.
Yeah. So I'm on the board of. So sales enablement is, as you can hear, very important to me, and it's something I'm passionate about. And I think that every company in the world should have a sales enabler to help them perform better and deliver better results for themselves. I decided and I collaborated with a group of a handful of people across the world, and we said, well, let's put together a foundation for this, or a space where we could get enablers to come together, learn from each other, but also raise up the value of sales enablement with one voice. And so we put together a foundation called Trust Enablement, and we're doing some fun work in that space. I'm loving, actually, recently I've been talking to some colleagues, some peers in Asia Pacific, and I am loving that over the last few months, we're seeing lots more sales enablement roles coming up in Australia, ASEAN, Asia Pacific, and even Japan. So it's definitely a bubbling in profession in this part of the world.
Yeah, we've also had quite a few clients coming to us with similar requests. How can we enable our sales function? How can we help our people become more human, more customer centric in the way they do sales? And of course, now in the digital world, how do you connect over a screen? How do you replicate the handshake? All of those things are some of the things that we've helped both sales enablement functions with, and also sales professionals, of course. But since you've been in the sales space, since you were an Avon lady, how do you think it's changed over the last decade? Obviously, we've gone more virtual, but what other things are some of the things that's happened in the sales space and the sales enablement space?
Well, I'll start with the sales space. So the sales space has, from the time that I was selling Avon to housewives in London to now, so it's been quite a few years, and it's changed drastically. And the reason, I guess, the two big components of change is there's more choice and there's more information. That's the pillars of the change. So previously, salespeople used to have the luxury of educating the customer about a product or a solution. There was a lot of, that's where all the lovely lunches and the events and the flying to wherever, Cancun, to do a sales meeting, that's when all that used to happen. But now the customer has so much information on their fingertips, that they don't really, I think lunches and dinners still happen, but they don't really need that. They've made the decision before the salesperson comes in to the equation. So what the salesperson really needs to do is to be able to build rapport, show relevance, and engage the customer with value. That's what is the most critical piece. Before, it used to be able to showcase, show and tell them about the product and educate them, and the sales cycles were longer. Sales cycles are shortening because the customers know what they want. And there is definitely a lot more choice as well.
Yes, I think this thing about, one, there's a lot of products serving the same purpose, and I think as much as sales before maybe was also an experience, now it's in one way almost less about the product, but more about the experience and the connection that you're able to create in that short period of time that you have to kind of wow your customer, knowing that they've already made a decision to go with someone.
Absolutely, spot on.
Yeah.
And it's more than wow. I think it's about how relevant you are. It's not about the wow anymore. It's not about the pizzazz. It's how relevant can you be to my business, and how can you help me in many cases. I work in the IT space, so in many cases, it is about how you're going to help me look good to my superiors.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love this element about how you're bringing in that you're, as much as you're in B2B sales, you're still selling to a human being that is sitting behind that role in the company. So it's a lot about emotional and personal pieces that comes into the sales process, not just I'm here buying on behalf of my company, but if I buy this from you, what goals am I scoring? How do I look in front of my peers? Am I able to get a good deal? Because that will make me look great. Understanding those human emotions around the person you're selling to is super important, especially, I would say, in B2B sales.
Yeah, and harder to do, like you pointed out, in the last few years when everyone's virtual. So yeah.
So we kind of touched upon a little bit into it, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about what kind of humanizing sales mean and how does that fit into the sales process?
Yeah, I mean, look, humanizing sales is really about. I'm going to quote someone that I think is a genius. I really love him. He's in the sales enablement space. His name is Tim Ohai. I think he's written a book or two, and he leads sales enablement for Workday. Um, he said recently on LinkedIn, selling is not a numbers game, but it's a relevance game.
Mm.
And just that. And that those few words is exactly what selling is all about these days. It's not about how many prospects you can call. It's about how relevant you can be to them. And being relevant to the person is not just being relevant to that human being, but how are you relevant to their organization? In fact, when you're selling B2B, how are you relevant to their customers? How are their customers going to benefit from you? And that's really what humanizing sales is all about. I'm going to give you an example of something that happened to me quite recently. I bought, I was in need of a pair of shoes, running shoes. And I went to, we're in lockdown here in KL, or we have been in lockdown here in KL, so there are very few places open. And I wasn't going to venture too far away to get what I needed. So I went to one of the shops that had a large selection. I'm not going to name the shop, but it had a large selection of shoes. And remember, we're all in a pandemic, so there's not a lot of customers going into these shops. I walked in there, and for about 20 minutes, I kid you not, Sina, I looked at the walls of shoes. And my husband wanted to buy a pair of shoes, so there was two of us in the shop with about 10 service staff, and all were having a nice chat. And I'm looking at these walls of shoes. And then 20 minutes later, I said to my husband, Tom, I said, this is nuts. Let's get someone to help us because I don't know what I'm looking for, what I'm looking at. So I called one of their service staff and I said, really, could we get some help over here? I'm sorry to to disturb your party, but I would like to get out of here soon. Now I have a particular pronation in my foot. And so I need a particular type of shoe. Um, and so I told this person about the service staff about this pronation, and I said I'm looking for this specifically, this style of shoe, etc., etc., etc. Now he went away, and I think another 10, maybe 15 minutes later, came back with one pair of shoes and says it's pink. Just went,
Okay.
okay, that's interesting. That's a nice approach. So now I have spent, how long is it? It was about 40 minutes in that shop, staring at the wall, then giving all of my everything that I needed. I knew they weren't going to ask questions, so I said, "This is what I need," um, to the service staff, and he came back out and said, "Here you go. This is a good shoe." And I said, "Why is it a good shoe?" And he goes, "Oh, it's women's shoe. It's pink in color." And I said, "Okay." I went to
Okay.
another shop. I just said to Tom, we're leaving. I'm out of here. I can't waste any more time. Um, you know, really, I gave them some words of advice on how service should work. And I walked out of there.
But did you eventually get your shoes?
I walked out of there into a much smaller store that I wasn't going to because there isn't much choice. But the guy came up to me in that store and to Tom and said, "What can I help you with?" And I gave him the same spiel about my pronation and what I'm looking for. And immediately he said, "Well, okay, let me get you a couple of choices that may suit you at the moment." And he brought that out for me. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't what I was looking for. But it was good enough, and we were in a pandemic and I wasn't going anywhere else. So So I said, thank you very much. I bought it. It was a 5-minute decision. And Tom bought a pair of shoes too. That guy got our business. Now, going back to humanizing sales, the second much smaller shop with not enough variety actually was more saw me as a human being that had some needs, and he needed to support and serve my needs. He got my business. He got my husband's business as well. I'm not going back to that first shop again. Ever.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
absolutely. So I think there's something about how you show up as a salesperson to create that human experience for your customers. So how do you create that relationship, right? And a relationship is about asking questions, it's about understanding needs, and then of course being able to fulfill those needs with relevant products beyond this is a woman's shoes and this is pink. Maybe you could share a little bit about what do you think, how do you think that affects other companies in terms of having a salesperson that is able to have this empathy versus someone that maybe are not so great at doing that?
How does it affect other companies versus, well, I see this all the time, right? Sales is a tough job. I reckon sales is probably one of the tougher jobs I've seen, because you're given good quotas, big quotas. You're given, and if you hit the target, you're given an even bigger quota. So there's no stopping. If you can do it, you can do it better. And that's how businesses work. That's how businesses grow. And that is a fact. Now, what that naturally does, and I'd love to be able to work in a business where there isn't a sales quota, because where there is a sales quota, what that naturally does is it creates a space of transactional selling. And transactional selling is great for short-term sales, but in most cases you want a return customer. Unless you don't want a return customer, and then that's fine. But you want a return customer in most cases. And in today's world, you want a customer that there's this theory of land and expand. So you kind of bring a customer in with one component or one solution, and you try and expand your footprint through that organization. And so I guess the difference is, the harder the targets, in my experience, or the higher the targets, or the harder it gets, the more transactional it gets. And what that does is it breaks trust, and it doesn't help in the long run, or even in the short run, the seller hit their quota. So it's really important to step back and think, am I being relevant to this person, to this human? Am I being relevant to their industry? Am I making a difference to the organization? Will my solution help their customers to do something better? And I think that is that's the important part.
Yeah, I think this point that you're making about, is my solution relevant to the customer? So I think this is another part of sales that comes more on the back end, right? So sometimes we need to have the right product, the right solution to be able to sell it. So some salespeople can probably sell almost everything, but most of us, we need something that we believe in, something that is built with the customer in mind, and something that is relevant for the customers. So to tell a little bit of an example from my own country, we had I was working with a Norwegian bank, and they wanted to build a digital online bank for senior citizens. And this sounds great, right? We should make something simple for seniors. It should be big font. It should be a big green button, a big red button. It should be simple. So they said, okay, yeah, this sounds great. And the CEO was on board. Everyone was on board. And then in the end, they decided, okay, but before we launch this, we need to go and talk to the customer. We need to figure out if this is something they want before we invest millions. And I'm so happy they did, because what they found out was that changing this new fancy online bank had absolutely no effect for the customers, because they didn't struggle with the online bank, they struggled with turning on the computer. So it's also something about the relevance, both in the experiences we're hosting as sales professionals, but also how can we cascade the information that we have from sales back towards whoever is designing products, designing solutions, to make sure that there is that kind of product market fit for wherever and whichever type of problems we're trying to solve. So I guess in your experience, the smaller shoe company kind of got away with not having the perfect solution. But if they had more, then you would probably be a repeat customer there, even beyond the pandemic as well, right? So both of these two things, I think, is really important. How do we design our experience, but also how do we design our products and solutions to make sure we have that relevance every step of the journey?
Yeah, I think it's critical. I love that story with the Norwegian bank.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe you could. So I see we have some comments here in the chat. I love that. Please, if you have any comments, then let us know and drop it down below, and we will also be answering those. Also beyond the session, if there's any new comments coming in. But I would love to hear a little bit more about your role in Oracle. So how do you encourage or ensure a human sales process in your current role?
Yeah, so in my role, I look after a team of about 170 first-line salespeople, business development group for Japan and Asia Pacific. And we have a pretty solid onboarding process, pretty robust onboarding process, which we put them through. And our training, so we get people from all over, and some of them who haven't had a job before, so it's their first job, which is great fun actually to work with. But so we ask them to kind of forget everything that they've learned when they come, or they've done.
Forget everything. You're new here. I'm going to teach you what you need to know.
We're going to teach you what you need to know. Yes. And we've got a pretty, actually, probably, I would call it a world-class sales training that we put them through. And that training is focused on helping our reps be consultative in their approach. So train them to understand the customer first. Lots of persona training, so understand who you're talking to and what their KPIs are generally. Understand what the language of value for this individual is. Help them take them through a discovery process that is a 360-degree questioning technique around their needs, but not just about speeds and feeds. What's the vision? What would that tie into? What is, if you weren't able to meet this challenge, what would that mean for you? If you were to be able to overcome this challenge, what would that mean for you? And then talk about speeds and feeds. So we take them through a pretty robust customer first process of training. And this is I reckon it's about 3 weeks long that we put them through this in a series of role plays. We also give them tools to equip them to do lots of research around the customer and the industry, and then of course understand our solution and how that fits in with the customer. So we really do try, and then I've got coaches on my team who ensure this process is being driven. Through calls, through emails, and whichever way we prospect and engage with our customers. So that's how I do it at Oracle. Oracle's a very large company. I look after the business development group in Japan and Asia Pacific, and that's how we do it. Lots of understanding the person.
Yeah, so you mentioned this thing about utilizing personas, and I'm sure there's some people out there that knows very well what that is, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. What is it, and how does it help in a sales process, especially in B2B sales?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll start with an example, right? So we've got tech applications we've got two pillars of the business in Oracle. The tech pillar, where we serve our customers with cloud solutions in their IT infrastructure space, and we've also got applications side of the business. In the application side of the business, we've got applications for the marketing side of the business, for the finance side of the business, the finance officers, and for the HR side of the business. So all of these people, the buyers in all these groups, are different types of buyers, right? So CX, or customer experience generally talks to the marketing department. HCM generally talks to the HR department, and ERP to the finance department. And similarly, all of our technology solutions, cloud technology solutions, generally talk to the IT department. So the idea of understanding the persona is in each one of these solutions, there are several personas. If you think about an HR manager, an HR organization, you've got your HR leader, you've got a recruiter, you've got a talent advisor, etc., etc. You've got the whole length from hire to retire. You've got a whole bunch of people looking after different processes. That's what a persona is. Understanding what the key challenges of a persona are in the current environment, and each one of them, a recruiter and an HR leader over the last 2 years through the pandemic, had very different challenges. And being able to speak to those challenges and relate to those challenges, that's really where understanding and aligning to the persona works.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry?
Did that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. But how do you come up with these personas? Because obviously this is not something you just take out of thin air, right? This is based on research, maybe some interviews. So it's not like you just make these personas up. They're probably based on quite a lot of facts. So who are a part of determining that, and how does that work in Oracle?
So in Oracle, it's a global organization. So a lot of the work gets done marketing down, global marketing down. What we do down at an Asia Pacific level is we take some of this content that marketing has and we review it with our sales teams, but we also bring in our HR leader. So if it's the HR persona, we're very aligned to our HR leader, and we ask, in fact, her to come and talk to us about what are her big challenges and what would make sense for her and how would we position value with her. So we use the individuals in our organization to validate some of the content that comes down, but a lot of the content exists already.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to be honest, if an organization didn't have the content, Google. Google
find
has
Google,
got lots. Find Google, find key challenges for HR. In fact, I often tell my reps to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's something about, you can find a lot of information. You can have organizations that has these things. But we also actually have clients that comes to us who are particularly interested in this. So this is more on the sales strategy, right? How do we build playbooks? How do we build content around how to do selling, and how do we target that to specific people in an organization? So building that understanding and that strategy is definitely one part. Bringing in HR leaders, as you mentioned, having user research with them and actually talking to them can be really impactful when it's not in a sales setting, because when you're wearing your sales hat, you have a very different set of questions than if you're wearing your research hat or your understand hat to just figure out what do these people need, right? So that's something we had with our clients as well. I also love this thing that you mentioned, that this thing about forgetting that you're selling to another human. So you're mentioning things like understanding their KPIs, understanding what their goals are, how their goals are shifting during the pandemic. I've seen quite a lot of organizations that definitely do not do that, and they kind of forget this thing that I'm actually here selling to another human being behind this screen. It's not just a black screen with no camera on. There's actually someone there who has a job and who wants to be able to score some goals as well.
Yeah, I love that you guys do that kind of work. It's fantastic to see you, because I think it's so important, and it really is. I'm lucky we're working where I work, but a lot of organizations don't have access to a lot of this information, like personas and how do I become relevant, and even just understanding how to align to the persona that you're speaking with.
Because you can have a persona or an image of someone as much as you want, right? But if you're not empathizing with that, and if you're not really understanding what that means in terms of how you should be positioning your products and then it's not really worth a lot, right? So one thing is about having it, and the other part is about upskilling your people to be able to utilize that in a strategic way when they are in sales conversations, and even before sales conversations. You also mentioned something about research, and this is also something that I find very interesting around how little or how much research different sales professional does before they enter into a sales call. Do you have any tips or best practices around that?
Yeah, and I love how you said how little or how much, because how little you kind of see that, how much, actually that is a problem as well. Over research does become a problem in terms of productivity, but also in terms of making assumptions. So I think it's important to understand the company vision. So have a look at the, obviously have a really good sense of the company that you're talking to. Look at the mission statement, look at any financial reports that they may have. But also look at, I use LinkedIn, I use our teams to use LinkedIn a lot. And then also just Google some of the key personas to find out any latest news, anything that they may have done a podcast around that you could help building rapport with, that could help building rapport with. So I think it's about knowing the company, knowing, well, what works for me is knowing the company, knowing the financial status of the company, understanding where they're going, kind of in terms of vision and perhaps anything big in the news that you can think of, and then understanding the persona that you're about to talk to, or even the department that you're talking to. Via LinkedIn generally is how we get it. I know that doesn't translate in all regions in ASEAN, but most regions are pretty active on LinkedIn. That's all. And then once you've got some of this information, call the customer or engage or write them an email that's relevant to the information that you found. I feel like sometimes people just kind of get sucked into the research and forget to actually apply it, or don't apply it quick enough, or make assumptions from the research.
So it's basically be a little bit of a stalker, but make sure you don't get sucked into the world and become obsessed, and make sure to utilize this. I think this goes back to the story you mentioned earlier, and also the quote you mentioned earlier about how can we be relevant, right? So learn enough to be relevant, but don't overdo it. I have a little bit of another example there. So we actually had a client that came to us, and they really didn't know exactly why they weren't selling, because they felt like, well, we have a great product, and we have several great products. And they kind of went in to figure out why that was. And one thing we saw was that no one actually asked the customer what they needed before they started selling. So actually, a lot of customers already had this product or a similar product when they went straight into a sales conversation talking about why their product was great, without having done any research and without even asking what type of product that they were interested in. They were kind of just selling whichever product they had as their favorite. So that was a pretty interesting situation to be in. And I think that's quite common, this thing around not selling value and forgetting to ask questions. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, probably get into trouble for saying this.
Don't say anything that.
But one of the things that I show them is in my role I get a lot of vendors approaching me with tools that might be great for enablement or research, etc., etc. And they generally get through to me through LinkedIn, right? Through a LinkedIn message, because I accept everyone's connection request, and they generally get through to me with a LinkedIn request. And as soon as the LinkedIn request comes, you get the blah blah blah. You know how fantastic we are, and no, actually, sometimes I get, it was great to hear your podcast. By the way, do you know how fantastic we are?
Yeah.
And I said I might get into trouble because I do show my sales team some of these messages saying, guys, don't do this. Let's never do this because you haven't shown relevance. And I do go back to the person that's approached me because, I'm an enabler at heart. And I spend a little bit of time giving them feedback about their approach and why I'm not interested.
Of course,
so
of course.
Learning.
Of course. And hopefully they take it to heart as well.
Well, I try and couch it nicely.
Yeah, I think the last person I would want to sell a sales message to is you, Pooja, because I feel like you would analyze it and dissect it, what went well, what didn't go so well.
No, it's not true, everyone. It's not true. I wouldn't analyze and dissect. It's just when you say hello and how fantastic I am, and can I sell you something? That's when I need to give you feedback.
Absolutely, absolutely. But we talked quite a lot about how to show up in sales conversations, but I think there's some other pieces around that as well, around building relevant touch points from an organizational point of view. So how can we, especially now, mix between a digital and a physical sales experience where sales personnel is showing up only at a very small part of the journey, while actually a lot of customers are increasingly self-serving also in the B2B space.
Yeah.
Any thoughts around that kind of, or a process design around different touch points to deliver customer experience, to deliver a sales experience?
Yeah, it's actually a really good point. So the customer journey in most cases is getting shorter. And
Mm,
that goes back to the fact that there is choice in information. So the customer's already made the decision. They know competitive, they've done a competitive check-in already, and Google will give them all of that. They've probably got a network of people that already prefer a particular vendor over the other. So your customer knows it all. Now, what's the touch points for you? I think it's all the way. If you're not showing value and you're not confirming that you're showing value all the way through, I think it's very easy to lose that deal at any given point.
yeah,
Because really the differentiator is not anymore the the product or the solution. It is the value that you as an individual, you as the seller, can provide the customer all the way through the engagement.
yeah.
And and I do think it's important to keep qualifying and keep checking in with the customer all the way through the sales cycle. So I
Mm,
don't know if that answered your question. I don't see any particular touch points. I think you're always prospecting, you're always
mm.
qualifying all the way through the sales cycle and always clarifying.
Absolutely. So I think there's something around also intentionally designing or redesigning the sales process. I think some companies are maybe stuck in trying to keep the same process as they had before the pandemic, but just switching it to virtual. While in some situations, there's actually a need to rethink what are the different touch points where we want our customer to engage with us. How do we want their first meeting with us to be? Is that a person? Is that a web page? What type of
Oh,
materials do we
absolutely.
need to
Yeah.
create? So I think there's also something around beyond just how I show up as a sales professional. It's also about what does the company do to create those touch points so that I have better success to show up where I'm supposed to show up. But I also have all these other enabling factors that is helping me win this deal or win this sale or reach out to this client.
You make a very good point, and I hadn't thought of it that broadly in terms of the touch points along the customer journey. But it's a great point, and more companies, in fact, I should look at it now to see how customers are engaging better. Because I see our frontline sales teams as the first touch, and that's kind of where I was coming from. But absolutely, there's so many other touch points, um, and where do you want your customers to engage purposefully is a very good um,
Mm,
perspective to have. Thank you for that.
mm. Oh, absolutely. So I think it's a similar approach though as you do in your sales, right? You need to understand your customers. You can use design thinking on this, and I know that you have used quite a lot of design thinking before in IBM. I would love to hear a little bit about what that experience was. So tell me a little bit more about that experience utilizing design thinking in sales in IBM and also beyond.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of changed the way I looked at sales. So I'm quite happy to talk about it actually. Um, so years ago, well, not years ago, about 6, 7 years ago, IBM was going through a very large transformation themselves. So they're moving from they were transforming into a more, that was serving customers more digitally and moving into the cloud, analytics, predictive analytics, etc. space, right? From being a more traditional hardware, software type of company. So that was the transition that we're going into. And I was part of the global marketing team at that stage. And what we found was, while the marketing content was going out into the market, our sellers were still with this new messaging around creating a smarter planet. I don't know if anyone may remember that, but it was about creating. Our messaging was around creating a smarter planet with smarter solutions that IBM was serving our customers with. However, the sales team was quite still stuck into I sell hardware and software. So we found in marketing it was our job, we felt, to change that perspective and change that, get them to look at their customers differently and understand their customers differently. So what we did was globally, and the CEO was Ginny Romedy at that stage. She kicked off this program, design thinking program that fed all the way through the organization, top down, starting with the large accounts and then moving into the SMB process, where all we did was take them through and it was intense. It was these workshops were managed by a small village of people, but we took them through an intensive series of workshops that got them to see and understand how the customer, understand things from the customer perspective. What is the customer's market? What's the current and future state of the customer? What are the opportunities that this brings for the customers? What are the opportunities that the customers are missing, etc., etc. And that created a lot of shifts in the way we started selling. We were definitely a lot more consultative, larger deals, and apart from building strong relationships with our customers through this process, we were also delivering definitely much higher dollars than we were with the traditional hardware and software sale. And all it was about was design thinking. It was understand the human being at the core, understand the company at the core, understand the market. And literally, we had professors from Harvard that came to help us understand the market. There was a lot of research done, especially for the core accounts. How do you become more relevant to this customer in their own transformation journey, dear seller? And how are you going to position yourself in this space? And that really created a shift in them, created a shift in revenue for us. And it shifted my head into the space of using design thinking in everything that I do, in the back of everything I do, to be able to help our sellers see and humanize the way that they sell.
I think I can definitely relate to the design thinking in everything I do. And I think the story you're telling here is really about this thing about we need to truly understand the problem. So we need to understand the customer, the world they're living in, but also directly what is the problem that they're trying to solve. Because if we have a great understanding of the problem, then the solution becomes very evident. So if you know your product and then you also know your customer's problem, then it's easy to kind of match those two to create a sales experience and a value generating sales experience beyond, here, I'm here to sell you this, and you're awesome. I'm awesome too, and I have this product for you. So how can we create this relevance, as you're talking about, through that value creation, through that deep understanding of our customers, both on the research front, but also in those meetings, right? So I'm sure the way you talk to customers shifted probably quite a lot after that. How can we utilize different research technique, ask questions, be empathetic in how we approach people? What do you need? Why do you think that is? What's your challenges? So these kind of big type of questions are of course a part of what you say consultative selling, but they're also really based on design thinking.
They are absolutely. And actually, while you were talking, I thought of another thing. So in some cases, so we work with large accounts, in some cases, through this consultative method and through the design thinking approach, what we were doing is we were actually helping customers see that they're missing out on a market. So creating new markets for that customer. I won't mention the customer, but a customer in Asia Pacific, a very large retailer in Asia Pacific, for example, through the concept of questioning and understanding their market, the seller was understanding their market, realized what they were doing was they were servicing an age group that probably had a diminishing wallet size, and they weren't servicing the younger, I think it was the 31 to 36 age group that was actually starting to spend a lot more than they were before. So they were servicing the wrong group, and by changing their channels and the way they market and their products and services, this retailer was able to capture that market.
I think this is a great example of understanding your customer's customer as well. To see,
Yeah,
okay, so why are you choosing this market? Help me understand. And then
yeah,
from there, actually coming to the realization almost together that, well, maybe this is strategically the best thing we could do, right? And I
yeah,
think if you can be a salesperson that can help your customer win more sales, that's what you want to do, right? And if you can prove that value, then it's for sure a returning customer, because then they're earning money
absolutely.
by doing business with
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Mm. Okay, well, I think this was a really nice chat, Pooja. We've touched upon things from customer experience to empathizing sales, how to do research. We talked a lot about how you can show up more empathetic, and also some of your experiences. So it's been really nice to hear. So thank you so much for being here today, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk a little bit with us, and it was definitely a very insightful conversation for me. And I think from the viewers as well, feel free to keep adding comments. We will be answering as we go, even after this session ends. But until then, I think I just want to wish you a good night, Pooja.
Good night, and it was insightful for me too, Sina. So thank you for having me.
All
Take
right.
care. Bye bye. I hope everyone got some
Bye.
value from it.
Yeah,
Bye.
I hope so too. Thank you so much, guys.